Hello, my name is Shirley, and I used to live what many would consider a storybook life. I met Mark during college at a local coffee shop near campus. It wasn't a scripted, romantic meeting. We both reached for the same pumpkin spice latte. It was a cliché beginning, but it felt like the universe was giving us a nudge. "Seems like we have similar taste," Mark had said with a smile that melted my heart. "Looks that way," I replied, blushing but captivated. "But you can have the latte. I'll try something else." "Oh no, how about we share?" I'd hate to take away your first choice. That was Mark, ever the gentleman. He was studying business, while I was a literature major. We couldn't have been more different in our academic pursuits, but we found common ground in our shared dreams of a future filled with love and success. We dated for 2 years, and then, under a sky full of fireworks on New Year's Eve, he proposed. The wedding was something out of a fairy tale. Dressed in a white lace gown with Mark, looking dapper in his tux, we exchanged vows under a beautiful arch of roses. Our friends and family wept tears of joy. "You may now kiss the bride," the minister announced. Mark lifted my veil, looked deeply into my eyes, and said, "I promise this is just the beginning." Our lips met, and I felt like the happiest person in the world. The reception was a whirlwind of dancing, toasting, and jubilation. My bridesmaids kept telling me how lucky I was. "Oh my God, Shirley, he's like Prince Charming." My best friend, Lisa, exclaimed as we watched Mark charmingly engage with our guests. "I know, I can't believe he's mine," I said, almost pinching myself to check if it was all real. The honeymoon was a 2-week escapade in Bali, and every moment felt like we were floating in our own paradise. When we returned, we bought a lovely little house in the suburbs. Mark got a well-paying job at a renowned corporate firm, and I started teaching literature at a community college. The idyllic days stretched into months and years. Our lives were filled with candlelight dinners, weekend getaways, and movie nights cuddled on the sofa. When holidays came around, we celebrated them with as much enthusiasm as kids. Easter, Thanksgiving, Christmas. We did them all. But Halloween was special. Now, you must be wondering why I'm narrating all these happy moments when you know things took a turn for the worse. Well, it's essential to understand how deeply I believed in the life I was living. I loved Mark, and I believed he loved me. Everything was perfect, or so I thought. I was content, secure, and happy. Our life together felt like a never-ending honeymoon phase, even when we faced difficulties, like when Mark's company was going through layoffs or when my mom was diagnosed with diabetes. We held each other tight, believing that our love could weather any storm. But as you'll see, not all storms come with dark clouds and thunder. Some just strike you out of a clear blue sky, forever changing how you see the world around you. And sometimes the person holding the lightning rod is the one you least expect. That's all for now. The unraveling began the week before Halloween, a holiday that had always been filled with joy and playful scares. But that year, the fright became all too real, and the mask Mark wore finally came off. Halloween had always been our favorite holiday, a close second to Christmas. We went all out, decking our house with spooky decorations, watching horror movies all month, and of course, hosting our annual Halloween party. That year was no different, or so I thought. A week before Halloween, Mark and I decided it was time to buy decorations and costumes. We made a day of it, driving out to various shops, hunting for unique and eye-catching ornaments. We had a theme in mind: classic horror films. Our living room would be an homage to Dracula. The kitchen was to be a Frankenstein lab, and so on. "I found the perfect Dracula cape," Mark announced, holding up a piece of satin and velvet that looked like it belonged in a Gothic castle. "Excellent, Count Dracula," I chuckled. "And look what I found." Mark raised an eyebrow. "A mermaid in a horror film setup. It's the creature from The Shape of Water," I argued. "It's romantic horror." "Fair point. You'll make a stunning, if confusing, mermaid," he said, wrapping his arms around me for a quick kiss. We filled our cart with fake cobwebs, hanging bats, plastic skeletons, and a fog machine. After the shopping spree, we returned home and spent the evening decorating the house. It was fun. It felt like our love was tangible in those streamers, candles, and silly rubber spiders. Finally, the big night arrived. Our friends started trickling in around 8 p.m. Everyone was impressed by the effort we'd put into decorating, and the costumes were equally fantastic. Lisa came as a witch, complete with a pointy hat and a broom. Our friend Jack came as a mummy, wrapped in bandages that he claimed took him an hour to put on. "Shirley, you outdid yourself. The place looks fantastic," Lisa said as she walked in. "Mark deserves half the credit," I replied, gesturing to my pirate-clad husband who was offering drinks to the guests. As the evening wore on, we played board games, Monopoly, Clue, Scrabble. People laughed and joked, placing friendly bets on the side. Occasionally, the doorbell would ring, and a group of neighborhood kids would shout, "Trick or treat." Mark and I would rush to the door, bowls of candy in hand. "Here you go, little goblins and superheroes," Mark would say, putting on his best Dracula voice. Everyone seemed to be having a great time, and I felt a sense of fulfillment and happiness. We'd put in a lot of effort to make this night perfect, and it felt like it had paid off. Even as our friends started to leave, thanking us for the fantastic evening, I was floating on a cloud of joy. "Thank you guys for coming," I said, giving out hugs as our last friends left. "Drive safe. See you next year," Mark added, waving from the doorstep. We closed the door, and I looked at Mark, smiling. "Yep," he said, but his face lacked the excitement I felt. I couldn't have known then that my whole world was about to shatter. What happened next was something I never saw coming, something that would break the fairy tale illusion I had of my life and my marriage. As I walked into the kitchen to start cleaning up, I sensed a change in the air, like the drop in pressure before a storm. And then the storm hit. I walked into the kitchen, my steps light, still humming the tune that had been playing when our last guests left. My hands were already reaching for a dishcloth and some detergent when I noticed Mark. He was standing there, staring at me. But it wasn't the affectionate gaze I was used to. This was something cold, something I'd never seen before. The atmosphere in the room changed instantaneously, like someone had sucked all the warmth out. "Is something wrong, babe?" I asked, my voice tinged with concern. In reply, Mark's open palm met my cheek with a swift, shocking slap. The force was so strong it sent me staggering back a couple of steps, my hand instinctively flying up to my stinging face. "You don't need a costume, Shirley," he spat out, his voice venomous. "You're ugly enough as it is." I was stunned, my eyes widening as I looked at him. This was Mark, my Mark, the man who had sworn to love and protect me. What had just happened? Was this some kind of sick joke? "Are you serious right now?" I asked, my voice trembling as I fought back tears. "Did you just hit me and insult me?" Mark scoffed. "Maybe it's about time someone knocked some sense into you." Tears overflowed, streaming down my cheeks as I stood there, speechless. I couldn't comprehend what had just occurred. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it. Had I missed the signs? Had there been signs at all? He turned away from me and walked out of the kitchen, his footsteps echoing through the hallway before he slammed the bedroom door shut. I was left alone, standing in the dim light of our Frankenstein-themed kitchen, questioning the reality of my life. How had love morphed into this? Was our picture-perfect existence merely a facade? A plethora of questions swirled through my mind, each unanswered, leaving me feeling hollow and deceived. I didn't know how long I stood there. It felt like an eternity, but it might have been just a few minutes. I was torn between a need to confront Mark and a compulsion to escape. My cheeks still throbbed, the physical pain mirroring the emotional ache that spread through my chest and settled like a stone in my stomach. Finally, I moved. Mechanically, as if in a trance, I began to clean up the kitchen. I wiped down the counters, put dishes in the dishwasher, and swept the floor. Each motion felt surreal, like an out-of-body experience. I was going through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere, reliving that horrendous moment over and over again. Eventually, my body guided me to the living room couch, where I sat down and buried my face in my hands. The tears wouldn't stop. Everything I believed about my life, my marriage, and the man I loved was shattered. And just like that, the mask fell off. I could no longer pretend that everything was fine, nor could I fool myself into believing this was a one-time incident. Something was terribly wrong, and in that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't stay. As the night deepened, I didn't go back to the bedroom. Instead, I stayed on the couch, lost in thoughts and memories, already missing the woman who had walked into this house earlier in the evening, innocent and naive. That version of me was gone, replaced by someone who had glimpsed the ugly truth behind the mask of marital bliss. When morning light streamed through the windows, it found me still sitting there, my decision firm and my plans starting to take shape. I knew what I had to do next, no matter how much it hurt. And as I got up to pack my bags, the tears had dried up, replaced by a resolve I had never felt before. I tiptoed into the bedroom to grab a suitcase. I couldn't bear to look at Mark, who lay there snoring, completely oblivious to the havoc he'd wreaked on our lives. My eyes darted around the room, landing on family pictures and vacation snapshots. It was almost like looking at the lives of strangers. How did it all turn out so wrong? I started packing. Clothes, toiletries, some important papers. Every item I placed in the suitcase felt like a tiny step towards reclaiming my life. My hand hesitated as I picked up a framed picture from the nightstand. It was a photo from our honeymoon, both of us beaming, the ocean providing a surreal backdrop. "I wish I could go back and warn you," I whispered to the girl in the picture. Once I was packed, I scribbled a short note and left it on the kitchen table. It read, "I can't stay. Please don't try to find me." Taking a deep breath and gripping the suitcase handle tightly, I walked out of the house. As the door clicked shut behind me, I felt a weird mix of relief and utter sadness. The cool morning air hit my face, and I took a moment to breathe it in, as if trying to absorb the freedom it represented. I drove to my mother's house. My hands were shaking so much I could hardly grip the wheel. When I arrived, Mom was already up, sipping her morning tea. She looked up and caught sight of my suitcase and then my face. A tableau that told her something was terribly wrong. "Shirley, what happened?" Her voice was tinged with worry. I collapsed into her arms, and for the first time since last night, I felt safe. My tears started to flow freely as I recounted the horrifying events. "Oh my God, Shirley, I can't believe he'd do this," Mom said, hugging me tight. "I can't either, Mom. I thought I knew him. I thought he loved me." My mom sighed, then looked me in the eyes. "Honey, you have to protect yourself now. That means legally. You need to remove the beatings and also write a statement for the authorities." My mind raced. The idea of involving the police seemed so extreme. Yet, hadn't Mark's actions been extreme? "I'll remove the beatings," I finally said. "But I can't." "No, I won't. Write a statement. I can't bear to see this in court records, to have everyone know." Mom pressed her lips together, a clear sign she disagreed. "All right, but promise me if there's ever a next time." "There won't be a next time," I interrupted, my voice tinged with a newfound determination. "I'm not going back. I'm going to file for a divorce." Filing for divorce was both liberating and heart-wrenching. Even as I signed the papers, a part of me mourned for the love I'd once felt, for the life we'd planned together. But another part, a growing part, felt the stirrings of independence, the inklings of a life free from the fear and humiliation that had marred my recent days. As it turned out, I got 50s of our property, which meant I had the resources to start anew. Mark showed up to the legal meetings, his face unreadable. When he tried to offer an apology, I cut him off. "How low you have fallen that you bow down to a scarecrow," I said, a grim smile crossing my lips. The look on his face was a mix of confusion and humiliation, and for the first time, I didn't care how he felt. I was breaking free not just from Mark, but from the cage of expectations and illusions that had kept me from seeing the truth. As I walked out of the lawyer's office, papers in hand, I couldn't help but feel that a new chapter was beginning. A chapter written solely by me. A month had passed since the divorce papers were filed. During this time, my morning sickness worsened. I was frequently nauseous, fatigued, and unable to eat much. My mother, seeing my condition deteriorate, decided it was time to break the news to Mark. Even though I wanted nothing to do with him, the reality was that he was the father of my unborn child. About 15 minutes after Mom called him, I heard a knock at the door. My heart pounded in my chest as she went to open it. Mark stepped into the house, his eyes immediately finding mine. "Shirley," he began, "I heard about the baby. I can't believe you didn't tell me. We need to talk." I looked him square in the eye, my voice steady. "What is there to talk about? You lost any right to be a part of my life or my child's life the moment you raised your hand to me." Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know I messed up. But Shirley, that's our child. Don't I have a right to be a part of its life? Do rights come into play when you're assaulting your pregnant wife?" I retorted, crossing my arms. "You're not fit to be a father." His face turned a shade redder, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and regret. "I am sorry, Shirley. Really, I am. Can't we find a way to work things out for the sake of our child?" I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Work things out? You still don't get it, do you? You lost me, Mark. You lost your family the second you decided that violence was an acceptable way to express your frustration or whatever twisted emotion you felt that night." Mark looked defeated, his eyes avoiding mine. "So, that's it then. You're just gonna raise this child by yourself. What are you going to tell them about me?" "I'll tell them the truth," I said. "That their father was a man who didn't know how to control his anger. A man who didn't respect the woman he vowed to love and cherish, but also a man they can choose to know or not when they're old enough to understand." "Shirley, you can't." "I can and I will," I interrupted. "This is non-negotiable, Mark. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." The room fell silent. Mom had been observing our conversation from a distance, and I could see the approval in her eyes. She had raised me to be strong and to stand up for myself, and despite the pain and humiliation I'd endured, that inner strength was still there. Mark finally broke the silence. "All right, if that's how you feel, there's nothing more I can say. But you haven't just stripped me of a wife. You've also stripped me of a chance to be a father to my child." "No, Mark," I said, as he turned to leave. "You stripped yourself of those privileges. Don't twist this into something it's not. You have only yourself to blame." He paused for a moment at the door, as if contemplating a final plea, but then shook his head and walked out. As the door closed behind him, a wave of emotions washed over me. Sadness, relief, but most of all, a sense of finality. I turned to my mother, who walked over and hugged me. "You did the right thing, honey." "I know, Mom. I know." In that moment, I felt the weight of my past lift ever so slightly. It wasn't gone, not completely, but it felt more bearable. I was moving on, and as much as it pained me to admit it, that final encounter with Mark was the closure I needed to truly start anew. It was the end of a painful chapter, but also the beginning of whatever came next, a story that I would write on my own terms, free from fear and manipulation. Months rolled by, and the baby bump that had started as a small curve was now unmistakable. As my due date approached, the reality of motherhood started to set in. Despite the emotional turmoil of the past, I had something to look forward to, a new life, both literally and metaphorically. I'd enrolled in parenting classes, read books, and done everything possible to prepare myself for the life-changing event that was to come. My mother was my rock throughout this journey, attending doctor's appointments and even helping me set up a nursery. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen flashed with Mark's name. I felt my stomach churn, a queasy mix of anxiety and disgust. It had been so long since we last spoke, and I couldn't fathom why he was reaching out now. "Who is it?" Mom asked, looking up from her knitting. "It's Mark. Do you want to answer it?" I hesitated for a moment, pondering the wisdom of reopening old wounds. Finally, I picked up the phone. "What do you want, Mark?" "Shirley, I've been doing some thinking," he began hesitantly. "I've been going to therapy, trying to become a better man. I know it's a lot to ask, but can we meet? I feel like there are things that need to be said." "What could you possibly have to say that would change anything?" I retorted. "You're a little late to be having epiphanies. It's not about changing the past. It's about reckoning with it. Please, can we meet?" I sighed, torn between my wish to never see him again and the nagging feeling that maybe a final conversation would bring closure. "Fine. Tomorrow, public place, we agreed to meet at a cafe, neutral ground. I arrived early, taking a seat near the window. I dressed plainly, purposely avoiding any attempt to look attractive for him. When he walked in, the first thing I noticed was how much older he looked. Stress and regret had aged him significantly. "Shirley," he said softly as he sat down. Mark. He looked down, struggling to find the words. "I've been seeing a therapist, like I said, and I've realized that I had no right to treat you the way I did. It was abhorrent, and I'm so deeply sorry for the pain I caused you. Sorry doesn't undo the damage, Mark. I know it doesn't, but I had to say it, for whatever it's worth." We sat in silence, the tension palpable. Finally, I spoke. "So what now?" "Now, I continue working on becoming a better man. And you become the amazing mother I know you'll be. And what about our child?" He looked pained. "That's up to you. If you ever think I've changed enough to be a part of their life, then I'd like that very much. But I know I've forfeited any right to ask that of you." "You're right, you have. But everyone deserves a chance at redemption, Mark. Even you. However, you have to earn that chance." Mark nodded, seemingly lost in thought. We parted ways with a final, awkward goodbye. As I left the cafe, I felt as though a chapter had finally closed. There was no going back to what was, but there was now a space for what could be, for both of us. Returning home, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Seeing Mark had been emotionally draining, but it had been necessary. There was a reckoning in that meeting, a laying bare of truths and consequences.